All right, welcome to Lesson 10, where we'll be reviewing aeronautical decision making and risk management. And first we'll start off with Crew Resource Management, also known as CRM. While CRM focuses on pilots operating in the crew environments, many of the concepts apply to single pilot operations, which led to the development of Single Pilot Resource Management, also known as SRM. SRM is defined as the art and science of managing all of the resources available to a single pilot prior to and during flight to ensure the successful outcome of the flight. Single Pilot Resource Management includes the concepts of aeronautical decision-making, ADM, risk management, task management, automation management, controlled flight into terrain awareness, and situational awareness. Now, SRM training helps the pilot maintain situational awareness by managing the automation and associated aircraft control and navigation tasks, which enables the pilot to accurately assess and manage risk and make accurate and timely decisions. The crew resource management is the effective use of all available resources involved in an in-flight operation to include human, hardware, software, and all information prior to and during the flight operation. A remote pilot in command may incorporate the visual observer or observers and other crew members to provide situational awareness pertaining to local auto and pedestrian traffic, airspace, weather, and aircraft loading and performance. Checklists ensures procedures are followed and prevents the remote pilot from relying on short or long-term memory for repetitive tasks. Remember that one? That may be on your exam. Checklists ensure procedures are followed. Good communications is also tantamount with all crew members, so changes in the operating environment can be quickly and effectively communicated, whether by direct line of verbal communications or via walkie-talkie. In addition to a visual observer, the remote pilot in command may assign someone to monitor and control all tasks given to each crew member to ensure that one member of the team doesn't become overburdened. This individual would be called the task manager. There also might be someone to monitor air traffic on a VHF radio, or another person assigned to listen to weather briefings, maybe another person assigned to visually monitor the physical presence of air traffic, and maybe yet another person to monitor pedestrian traffic. When adapting crew resource management concepts to a flight operation, CRM is thereby integrated into all phases of the operation. Now, situational awareness describes the accurate perception and understanding of all of the factors and conditions that affect safety before, during, and after flight. Remember that. That may be on the exam. An extreme case of a pilot being overtaxed, or what's also referred to as getting behind the aircraft, can lead to the operational pitfall and loss of situational awareness. Getting behind the aircraft is an expression that simply means losing your situational awareness and mental control where the aircraft kind of gets ahead of you. Risk management, as part of the aeronautical decision-making process, relies on situational awareness, problem recognition, and good judgment to reduce the risks associated with each flight. When a remote pilot relies on short and long-term memory for repetitive tasks, one of the most neglected items a remote pilot in command forgets about is the checklist. Checklists in aviation is always used, especially in all manned pilot operations. Pilots love checklists. So to avoid missing important steps, always use a checklist. Consistent adherence to approved checklists is a sign of a disciplined and competent pilot. Now, aeronautical decision making, or ADM, is the systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action in a response to a given set of circumstances. It is what a pilot intends to do based on the latest information he or she has. The importance of learning and understanding effective ADM skills cannot be overemphasized, and despite all of the changes in technology to improve flight safety, one factor that remains the same, the human factor, which leads to errors. Now, to effectively understand ADM is to also understand how personal attitudes can influence decision making and how those attitudes can be modified to enhance safety in the operation of your small unmanned aircraft. It's important to understand the factors that cause humans to make decisions and how the decision-making process not only works, but how it can be improved. So steps for good decision-making are identifying personal attitudes hazardous to flight safety, learning behavior modification techniques, learning how to recognize and cope with stress, developing risk assessment skills, using all resources, evaluating the effectiveness of one's ADM skills. So remember this again, ADM is a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. Now, risk management safety is an important element for a remote pilot to consider prior to operating their unmanned aircraft system. To prevent the final link in the accident chain, a remote pilot must consider the methodology of risk management. Once appropriate risk controls are developed and implemented, then the flight operation can begin. Remote pilots are expected to develop risk acceptance procedures, which should include the likelihood of an event happening and the severity of the situation. So once established, the acceptability of risk can be evaluated using a risk matrix as shown. So unacceptable obviously is shown in the red, where combinations of severity and likelihood cause risk to fall into the red area. The risk would be assessed as unacceptable, and further work would be required to design an intervention to eliminate that associated hazard or to control the factors that lead to higher risk likelihood or severity. Acceptable, shown in green, where the assessed risk falls into the green area, it may be accepted without further action. The objective in risk management should always be to reduce risk as low as practicable, regardless of whether or not the assessment shows that it can be accepted as is. Acceptable with mitigation, the yellow, where the risk assessment falls into the yellow area, the risk may be accepted under defined conditions of mitigation. An example of this situation would be an assessment of the impact of a SUAS operation near a schoolyard, for example. Scheduling the operation to take place when school is not in session could be one mitigation to prevent undue risk to the children that study and play there. Another mitigation could be restricting people from an area of operations by placing cones or security personnel to prevent unauthorized access during the SUAS flight operation. The goal of risk management is to proactively identify safety-related hazards and mitigate the associated risks, and risk management is an important component of ADM. And when a pilot follows good decision-making practices, the inherent risk in a flight operation is reduced or even eliminated. The ability to make good decisions is based upon direct or indirect experience and education, and the formal risk management decision-making process involves 6 steps. Identifying the hazards, assessing the risks, analyze the controls, make control decisions, using the controls, and then monitor the results. 2 defining elements of ADM are hazard and risk. Now, hazard is a real or perceived condition, event, or circumstance that a pilot encounters. When faced with a hazard, the pilot makes an assessment of that hazard based upon various factors. The pilot assigns a value to the potential impact of the hazard, which qualifies the pilot's assessment of the hazard risk. Therefore, risk is an assessment of the single or cumulative hazard facing a pilot. However, different pilots see hazards differently, such as an experienced remote pilot may perceive an oncoming flock of seagulls or geese quite differently than that of a newly certified remote pilot. Now, being fit to fly depends on more than just a pilot's physical condition and recent experience, as attitudes can greatly affect the quality of decisions. Now, attitude is a motivational predisposition to respond to people, situations, or events in a given manner. Studies have identified 5 hazardous attitudes that can interfere with the ability to make sound decisions and exercise authority properly. We have anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, macho or machoism, and resignation. Hazardous attitudes contribute to poor pilot judgment, but can be effectively counteracted by redirecting the attitude so that correct action can be taken. Recognition of hazardous thoughts is the first step toward neutralizing them. After recognizing a thought as hazardous, the pilot should label it as hazardous and then state the corresponding antidote. Antidotes should be memorized for each of the hazardous attitudes so that they automatically come to mind when needed. So here we have anti-authority. That is, don't tell me what to do. This attitude is found in people who do not like anyone telling them what to do. Now, in a sense, they are saying, no one can tell me what to do. They may be resentful of having someone tell them what to do, or may regard rules, regulations, and procedures as silly or unnecessary. Now, of course, it's always your prerogative to question authority if you feel it's an error, but don't be anti-authority. And the antidote, and this may appear on your exam, follow the rules. They are usually right. Next, we have impulsivity. Do it quickly. This is the attitude of people who frequently feel the need to do something or anything immediately. They do not stop to think about what they are about to do, and they do not select the best alternative, and they do the first thing that comes to mind. The antidote for that? Not so fast, think first. Then we have invulnerability. It won't happen to me. Many people feel that accidents happen to others, but never to them. They know accidents can happen, and they know that anyone can be affected, but they never really feel or believe that they will be personally involved. And remote pilots who think this way are more likely to take chances and increase risk. So the antidote is, it could happen to me. Then we have macho or machoism. I can do it. Remote pilots who are always trying to prove that they are better than everyone else are thinking, I can do it, I'll show them. Pilots with this type of attitude will try to prove themselves by taking risks in order to impress others. Many times the basic drive for a pilot to demonstrate, quote unquote, the right stuff can have an adverse effect on safety by generating tendencies that lead to dangerous practices. Now, while this attitude is thought to be a male characteristic, women are equally susceptible. And the antidote to the macho is taking chances is foolish. And then we have resignation. What's the use? Remote pilots who think, what's the use, do not see themselves as being able to make a great deal of difference in what happens to them. When things go well, the pilot is apt to think that it is just good luck. When things go badly, the pilot may feel that someone is out to get them or attribute it to bad luck. The pilot will leave the actions to others for better or worse. Sometimes such pilots will even go along with unreasonable requests just to be the nice guy. And the antidote to resignation is, I'm not helpless. I can make a difference. So here's a graph on the hazardous attitudes and the antidotes, and these will be available for you to print out if you just want to use them as a flashcard, so to speak, to refer to. Some of these or several of these may be on your final exam. Mitigating risk. Now, one way to mitigate risk is to perceive hazards by incorporating the PAVE checklist into pre-flight planning to have a simple way to examine for risk prior to each flight. Once a pilot identifies the risks of flight, he or she needs to decide whether the risk or combination of risks can be managed safely and successfully. So P would be the pilot in command. The pilot is one of the risk factors in a flight. The pilot must ask, am I ready for this flight in terms of experience, recency, currency, physical, and emotional condition? The I'm safe checklist provides the answers. So you have illness. Am I sick? Illness is an obvious pilot risk, severity of sickness. Medication, am I taking any medications that might affect my judgment or make me drowsy? Stress, am I under physiological pressure from a job or money issues or health or family problems? Alcohol, have I been drinking within the past 8 to 24 hours? Fatigue, am I tired and not adequately rested? Emotion, am I emotionally upset? A, for aircraft, what limitations will the aircraft impose upon the trip? Is this the right aircraft for the job? V, for environment. How is the weather for your particular flight operation? What is the current ceiling and visibility? Is the weather different than the forecast? Are there thunderstorms present or forecasted? How's the temperature? Dew point spread? The evaluation of terrain is another important component of analyzing flight environment. And of course, always checking NOTAMs or temporary flight restrictions. And then E for external pressures. External pressures, external influences that create a sense of pressure to complete a flight, often at the expense of safety. Factors that can be external pressures include the desire to demonstrate pilot qualifications or to impress someone or to get the job done. The pilot's general goal completion orientation is the remote pilots in command emotionally and professionally experienced to fly. Managing external pressures, the single most important key to risk management, because it is the one risk factor category that can cause a pilot to ignore all of the other risk factors. Remember, the remote pilot in command is responsible for determining whether any crew member is fit to perform the operation. So, if advice is needed concerning illness-related flights, remote pilots should contact an aviation medical examiner. Remember that. So you can also use the DECIDE model to mitigate risk, and it can help remote pilots continually evaluate each operation for hazards and to analyze risk. So D for detect. Detect the fact that a change has or has not occurred. Estimate the need to react to or counter the change. Choose a desirable outcome for the flight or situation. Identify actions to control the change successfully. And do take the necessary actions. And then E for evaluate the effects of the action to react to or counter the initial change. So the 6 elements of the DECIDE model represent a continuous loop decision process, which can be used to assist a remote pilot in the decision-making process when he or she is faced with a change in a situation that requires a judgment. And this DECIDE model is primarily focused on the intellectual component, but it can have an impact on the motivational component of judgment as well. If a remote pilot practices the DECIDE model in all decision making, it can become very natural and could result in better decisions being made under all types of situations. And now we have situational awareness, which is the accurate perception and understanding of all factors and conditions within the 5 fundamental risk elements that affect safety before, during, and after flight. These fundamental risk elements are flight, pilot, aircraft, environment, and the type of operation, which may compromise any given aviation situation. Maintaining situational awareness requires an understanding of the relative significance of all flight-related factors and their future impact on the flight. When a pilot understands what is going on and has an overview of the total operation, he or she is not fixated on one perceived significant factor. Not only is it important for the remote pilot to know the aircraft's geographical location, it's also important he or she understand what is happening. Obstacles to maintaining situational awareness. Now, fatigue, stress, work overload can cause a pilot to fixate on a single perceived important item and then thereby reducing an overall situational awareness of the flight. A contributing factor in many accidents is the distraction that diverts the pilot's attention from monitoring the aircraft. Workload management. Effective workload management ensures essential operations are accomplished by planning, prioritizing, and sequencing tasks to avoid work overload. As experience is gained, a remote pilot learns to recognize future workload requirements and can prepare for high workload periods during times of low workload. When a work overload situation exists, a pilot needs to stop, think, slow down, and prioritize. So it is important to understand how to decrease workload. All right, congratulations on Lesson 10. I know that was a lot of information. We're going to be reviewing actually 15 sample questions and answers here. Now, which of the following would medically disqualify a remote pilot from flying? Review those. Would it be taking a prescription medicine that does not have any noticeable side effects? Having a migraine headache with blurred vision as a side effect? Or occasional muscle soreness? And the correct answer is having a migraine that produces blurred vision. The effective use of all available resources, human, hardware, and information, prior to and during flight to ensure the successful outcome of an operation is called? And the correct answer, the effective use of all available resources, is crew resource management. What are some of the hazardous attitudes that will occur to every remote pilot to some degree at some point in time? And the correct answer is anti-authority, impulsivity, macho, resignation, and invulnerability. Now, which will almost always affect a remote pilot's ability to fly? So it wouldn't be OTC or antibiotics. It would be prescription antihistamines. Which of the following is the first step of the DECIDE model for effective risk management and aeronautical decision making? And the D stands for detect. Safety is an important element for a remote pilot to consider prior to operating an unmanned aircraft system. So to prevent that final link in the accident chain, a remote pilot must consider which methodology? Remember the final link? And that would be risk management. A series of judgmental errors, which can lead to a human factor-related accident, is sometimes referred to as the judgmental errors, the error chain. The blank is a trained crew member who's in visual line of sight of the small unmanned aircraft, who assists the remote pilot in the duties associated with collision avoidance and complying with the applicable rules of flight. Visual line of sight is the clue, and the answer is visual observer. Risk management, as part of the aeronautical decision-making process, relies on which features to reduce the risks associated with each flight. Risk management is part of the ADM process. And the correct answer is situational awareness, problem recognition, and good judgment. What is one of the neglected items often forgotten to use when a pilot relies on short and long-term memory for repetitive tasks? And remember, manned pilots love these. And the answer is checklists. Consistent adherence to approved checklists is a sign of a disciplined and competent pilot. An extreme case of a pilot getting behind the aircraft can lead to the operational pitfall of, remember that, getting behind the aircraft is loss of situational awareness. A local TV station has hired a remote pilot to operate the small unmanned aircraft to cover a breaking news story. The remote pilot has had multiple near misses with obstacles on the ground and 2 accidents as well. What would be a solution for the news station to improve their operating safety culture? That question may likely appear on the exam. And the correct answer would be, and always feel free to pause the video if you want to look for the answer first, but the news station should recognize these hazardous attitudes and develop standard operating procedures that emphasize safety. Aeronautical decision making, ADM, is, and again, feel free to pause the video if you want to read these out. Aeronautical decision making is a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action for a given set of circumstances. And we have these additional questions because they will likely appear on your final exam. So when adapting crew resource management concepts into the operation of a small unmanned aircraft, CRM must be integrated into. And of course, it's all phases of the operation. All right, congratulations on Lesson 10. You successfully completed crew resource management. Now, there'll be just one more lesson, and it's a fairly short lesson under physiological factors affecting pilots, and then we're done. And we'll have a lot of reviews to go over and a crash course in Lesson 12. Congratulations. We'll see you soon.